and welcome to this home edition of Politics Today. And in this programme today, we'll be talking about the lockdown, the third lockdown that we're in, with no real sign that this is going to end anytime soon. So we'll be talking about what are the spiritual implications of the lockdown? What does it mean for Christians? What should our response as Christians be to this lockdown? But also, what kind of world will emerge from COVID-19? So to join me in this very important programme today, I'm joined by Tim Dieppe, who is the Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, and also David Curtin from the Heritage Party, who is also a Christian member of the London Assembly. So guys, warm welcome to Politics Today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tim, I'll start off with you, because I did struggle this week to decide what topic we should discuss. And you sent me a very interesting article written by Dr. Joe Boot, and it's on the Christian Concern website, that says Christian liberties versus lockdown. And he's really giving a warning that in pursuing the government's policy of enforced lockdown, that we're in danger of losing our liberty and our freedoms. What are your thoughts regarding this lockdown? That this is the third lockdown since in the past 10 months, and it doesn't feel like this is going to end anytime soon.
Well, I'm very concerned about it, Simon, and I don't like it at all. And I think it's a massive infringement on basic freedoms and civil liberties. I think the thing that we've been most concerned about at Christian Concern is churches and the freedom of churches to meet. And as you may remember, there was a massive battle about that after the first lockdown and then the second lockdown as well. And we launched a legal case against the government. And just before it went to court, so after the first lockdown, the government backed down, allowed churches to meet again. Then in November, they closed churches again in England. And we gathered a much larger group. There's much more support now. I think in the original lockdown, everyone was terrified. In the second lockdown, many more churches were prepared to back us and support our work to challenge the government over closing churches. And even Theresa May said in Parliament that this may be done with good intentions, but it can pave the way for bad intentions. And the government now backed down on that, which praise God, we're really pleased about that. So in England and Wales, churches are one of the few things that are allowed to remain open. But in Scotland, that's not the case. In Scotland, gathering to worship God continues to be criminalised. Really just a shocking state of affairs. I mean, if you'd asked me now a year ago, you suggested that gathering to worship our God would be criminalized in the UK, I'd have said you're nuts, you're crazy. But it happened, right? It happened in this country, and police have gone into churches and stopped them and so on. Anyway, in Scotland, so we're pursuing a legal case on that, and we're hoping to get a judicial review heard against the Scottish government. As you say, it looks like it's not ending anytime soon. I think Scotland hopefully will be embarrassed by this, because churches are allowed to open in England and in Wales, and there's been no cases traced to churches meeting. Churches can meet safely. They can, do the social distancing, all that sort of stuff, wash your hands, etc., and meet and worship, and people don't get infected. It's safe. And it's one of the most important things you can do is gather to worship. Doesn't it say in Hebrews, let us not give up meeting together? Didn't Jesus say where two or three gather? I would suggest you can no more have virtual church than have a virtual marriage. It's not the same as real church. Praise God for technology like we're using now, so we can talk and meet in some form, but it's not the same as real church. And I think there's a real danger here that people are thinking you can have virtual church, and that's just as good, and it just isn't.
And David, warm welcome to the programme. What is your perspective on lockdowns, particularly if this is our third lockdown? I think Boris Johnson's announced that we could come out of this lockdown in mid-May. Seems like months away from now, obviously depending on how many people have been vaccinated. What are your thoughts on the lockdown and this infringement of civil liberties, but also our Christian freedoms?
Yeah, I've said from the beginning, right back in last March, that I'm against lockdowns. I think they're unnecessary. I think they're disproportionate to the threat of the virus. And there is a virus, and no question that there is. It's like a severe flu, but it's not something that needs us to completely stopped life in the country, which was what happened in the first and the second and the third lockdown. And I think in the first one, people didn't really know what was going on, so a lot of people accepted it. Perhaps there is a real threat here, but we see from the data now that there was no difference in the actual effects and the course of the pandemic between countries that did lock down and countries that didn't lock down, like Sweden and Brazil. So with that data, I think now there's no justification for the second and the third lockdowns, but still they're going ahead because of the government has deemed that that's the right thing to do, I think unnecessarily. And, worship is affected. That they had to back down because of legal action. I mean, it's good that they did, but worship in churches is not the same as it was. I mean, I went to a Christmas service in my local church and there was no singing, there was no carols, you couldn't talk to each other, people had to wear masks, so our faces, you can't see each other's faces and so on. So it's really, rather than being an uplifting experience, it's really quite a depressing experience to you. It's very much a downer on your spirit, which is not what the church is, should be. Going to a church, that's not what it should be about. We should be free to worship as we want to do. I mean, this is religious freedom, but this is part of the wider undermining of civil liberties as a whole, which has gone on with the lockdown. So there's no freedom of assembly. I've been to a lot of the freedom rallies that took place in London and Trafalgar Square and other places, and I was shocked actually to see, columns of riot police coming in to close down an entirely peaceful demonstration. And there was a story in London, sort of, I think it was a month ago or so, of a few people meeting in someone's back garden shed to have a coffee morning, to read the Bible and sing a few hymns, and the police came in to the house because someone had complained, and they closed it down and told everybody to go home. So they've totally taken away our freedom in a way that is completely unnecessary. Look, if this was something like the Black Death, I would probably support these kind of measures, but it's not, and we don't need them, and we need to keep on making the case to get our civil liberties back.
But it's interesting, David, because you referred to the Black Death. I had a look at the history of some of this, and in the plague in 1665, right, that killed a quarter of the population of London, right? Imagine that, a quarter of your school, a quarter of your church, a quarter of your road, a quarter of your family, every single family affected. And what did the Christians do? Well, the rich Christians ran away when they left the churches and locked them up and went off out of London. But the Puritans went in, right? They went into London where the plague was. They opened up the churches. It was illegal for them to do so, but they did it anyway. They said, nobody's going to stop us preaching the gospel. They went in and ministered and prayed and preached. Every church that opened the doors was packed. Lots of people came in. They even went into the blocked up houses, which were people quarantined, and gave them food and prayed for them and served them at great risk to themselves. And as a result of that, they got massive moral authority in the country and actual recognition for nonconformity, which we still benefit from today, right? That's our heritage. And I worry that today, here we have a plague that's killed 100 and something thousand. That's what, 0.2% of the population? By comparison with 25%, the comparison is incredible, right? Let's believing all the figures, 0.2%. And we're terrified and we're closing our church doors. What is wrong with us? Why are we so afraid? Isn't it meant to be that to live is Christ and to die is gain? I've only got to gain from this. Yes, let's take precautions. Let's wash our hands, etc. And so on. But, again, on singing, David, that's not against the law. It's only guidance. You can sing in the churches, but we're all so terrified that we're not doing it. Too many of us, let's say.
And David, are you concerned, being a London Assembly member, of how much power that our government is taking and other governments around the world are actually curbing our not only Christian freedoms, but essentially our whole liberties in order to justify this fight against COVID-19? And I just want to make clear that COVID-19 is real, that we've had key members of the Revelation team, presenters, including the CEO of the channel, Howard Conda, have COVID-19, and it's been devastating, and we can't get away from that. But in this fight against COVID-19, we have to protect our personal freedoms, because if we don't, then we see authoritarianism creep in. Is there great danger now that this our government has unprecedented powers now, taken away so much of our Christian and personal freedoms that they won't actually give them back.
Yeah, well, the danger is already here. It's already happened, because with the Coronavirus Act, which was passed back in March 2020, the MPs in Parliament basically gave all the power to the executive. So the government can now do what they want by statutory instrument, by basically order by decree. We've got government by decree. So essentially, we now live in a dictatorship, and they're supposed to review it every 6 months. But they had a vote in September to decide whether they were going to renew the powers of the Coronavirus Act or not, and they did by about 550 to 20 or something like that. I can't remember the exact figure, and there's going to be another vote coming up this March, and I worry that they're going to do the same, extend the powers that the government has for another 6 months, because it doesn't seem like either whatever party you've got in the House of Commons, they just accept that this is what needs to be done, and there's no sort of critical thinking about this. I mean, there's one or two really good MPs and lords who are standing up and saying, this is wrong, like Desmond Swain, like Lord Sumption, and so on, but they're few and far between. So, it doesn't look like the MPs are going to take back power from the government, which is what they need to do, because we've got a devastating situation now. We basically do live in a dictatorship, and they can decide to do whatever they want to. Just yesterday, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said there would be 10-year prison sentences for people who decide, who don't declare where they've been traveling. If you've been traveling to Portugal or Tanzania, they're countries on the list. This is draconian, and it's something that no one would have thought would happen in this country just a year ago. It's happened. So we are in a very, very dangerous situation, and people need to stand up and talk about it and demand that we get our civil liberties back. But I seem to be a lone voice in the London Assembly, because people from all other sides just seem to accept the lockdown and vaccination narrative, and I'm opposed to that. I think we need to get back to normal.
And Tim, I just want to quote from Dr. Joe Boot in his excellent article, Christian Liberty versus Lockdown. It says, history shows that people will not surrender liberties unless driven by fear. They believe they can trade liberty for safety and security from some deadly threat. And that threat is frequently exaggerated to justify authoritarianism or even totalitarianism. I mean, that's a very powerful quote that he's made there. But what can be done to put pressure on our government to ensure that our Christian freedoms are protected and our personal liberties are also protected?
Well, I think that the big thing here is exactly what you said. It's fear, isn't it? And people need to get away from this fear, actually. I mean, I agree with you. It's a real disease. I don't want to catch it, right? And I know lots of people have caught it and had it really nastily in some cases, but I don't know many people who've died from it. And that's the thing. I'm all in favor of protecting people who have vulnerabilities, who are old, whatever, that kind of thing, But young people who are virtually unaffected, get them back in their schools, get them back in their universities. They might get ill, but at least that'll build immunity over time, right? And very few of them will die, if any of them. And that's really what we should be doing here. And I think that the thing to do then is the problem is that at the moment the polls show that the public generally support lockdown because they're afraid. And the government has been exaggerating the fear. They put out an advert, did you see this, saying that somebody going for a jog is very likely to have COVID. Well, that's just not true. That the highest rate of infection was 3%. And lots of those people are ill at home or ill in hospital, right? So 97% at least the chances that a jogger you meet has not got COVID, right? And so if it actually took the Advertising Standards Authority, had to tell them, no, you can't use that, that's wrong, right? So they are scaremongering, and the news is scaremongering, and somehow people need to get over this fear and say to the government, enough is enough. The damage of this lockdown is massive on children, worst on the poorest. It affects the poorest the greatest. Those children who haven't got their own computer, haven't got their own room to study in, all that kind of thing, they're suffering the worst from this. There's a lot of depression, there's a lot of loneliness, There's massive economic cost. How are we ever going to pay the debt for this back? And somehow it's become normalized. We just get locked down week after week after week after week. Shops still closed, businesses still closed, businesses not able to operate. How are they going to pick up? I mean, I think it's very, very concerning.
And David, Tim there spoke about the human cost in terms of these lockdowns. I mean, if we look at the loss of livelihoods, the loss of jobs, mental health problems, increase in solvent abuse, alcoholism, all of this are adding to what looks like being a very fragile society once we emerge from the post-COVID-19 world. How important is it that the government does reach out to those clearly affected by the impact of the lockdowns? And without that central Christian gospel message, is there an answer to what I would only describe really as our society that is really falling to pieces?
Yeah, well, you're right. Society is falling to pieces and the government should be reaching out. But I honestly don't think the government really has that as their priority. It probably doesn't, care too much about the people who are, the collateral damage of this, which is an awful phrase, to just, it sort of says, oh, there's people who are affected by this, but they're, that's just, we can't do anything about it. I mean, I would think probably there's more people who have died and have been affected as a result of the lockdown than whose lives have been saved by the lockdown, because people are still dying of COVID. I don't think is as high as the figures say. They suggest that over 100,000, but some of those people are people who've died with COVID or with SARS-CoV-2, but from underlying other health conditions and so on. It's anybody who has a positive PCR test and dies within 28 days of that is recorded as dying from COVID-19 when it could have been something else entirely. So I think the figures are actually much lower than the government is saying. But there's so many people who haven't got treatments for cancer, for example, who haven't got other operations, on things like a hip replacement, knee replacement, which are very, very painful, conditions. You need an operation to get help. And people who've got heart disease and, die of heart disease and so on, they're not getting the medical treatment that they need because the NHS has been totally changed to focus entirely on this one disease, and everything else has been neglected, not to mention depression, loneliness, anxiety, and the suicides that are being caused by that among people from all age groups, from elderly people in the care homes who are dying from loneliness, to children in school who are committing suicide because of anxiety about their future, because they can't go to school, they can't see their friends, their education's been disrupted, and they've got no hope for the future. I mean, these are all things that don't seem to be even cross the government's mind, apart from to maybe say a 2-second platitude on a sort of a press conference. So we need to get back to normal, and we need to start allowing people to help other people. We see that the terrible thing about this is that there are all these terrible problems, and we can help each other in civil society. Particularly, that's what the church is really good at. If we can just go to people and see them, and hold them and put our arms around them, give them a hug, give them some comfort. But we're not allowed to do that except online. And as you said earlier, doing things online is no substitute for seeing people face to face in real life, being in a room with someone, being in a group with someone, being in a church with someone, so that we can all see each other together and support each other. Those sort of support networks for people have been completely destroyed by this, and that's really one of the prime reasons why we need to get out of this and need to get all of our civil liberties back, and to say we don't need this. The lockdowns, the way they've done it is absolutely wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you very much. Your very passionate sentiments there, David. Tim, is there not a danger when it comes to personal freedoms and authoritarianism that really this crisis is being exploited by the globalists, the likes of the World Economic Forum and their global reset, as a means of using this virus in order to push through moves towards world government, as we've seen in the kind of book of Revelation 13, that we are in a very dangerous period of world history, are we not?
Yeah, no, I do think that's right, and I think that those people who are pushing for more of a global government are, intent on using this crisis in that way and saying, look, this is a global phenomenon; it needs to be tackled globally, and pushing people to some form of globalized system on how we respond to this. I mean, I would just, David indicated this, but this virus is declining everywhere in the world at the moment. Doesn't matter whether you're locked down or not, or how strict your lockdown was or not, right? It's going down everywhere in the world, right? So this kind of should betray the evidence of what these lockdowns can do, and how effective they really are. I'm sure they make some difference, but the evidence is, from what we see around the world, that it's not that much. And why is the virus declining everywhere then? But I think this is a real concern. I think there is this talk about a great reset. And certainly there's a bandwagon that supports that, and Davos and all of that kind of stuff is going on. And I hope we don't go down that route. Obviously Brexit has come through, and that is a massive pushback against that whole thing. And it's great that Britain did so much better on the vaccines than Europe, from not being in the European system on that. And I think that's credit, and I think that is already some justification for Brexit, effectively, that's happened there. And the government has done good work getting vaccines out, and that's a good thing, and I'm pleased about that. But yes, we need to resist these pressures at globalization that are coming this way.
David, I mean, even talking about the kind of global reset and moves towards world government, a year ago, this would have been in the realm of conspiracy theories. But now we've seen, like, the leaders of the World Economic Forum, big global businesses, world leaders continually to support the slogan "Build Back Better." We've seen that Joe Biden's used this in election campaign, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Canada, and these all seem to be coming out of the World Economic Forum, where they're saying that they want to overthrow capitalism, replace it with global socialism, and that all of us will be happy owning nothing. Extraordinary. Do you think that something as evil as this can actually emerge after the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, well, I think it's very possible. And, as you said, the people all over the world, world leaders are saying this and using the same language. And, another phrase they use is the new normal. And I noticed that a lot of the world leaders at various times are wearing an Agenda 2030 lapel badge on their on their shirts or their suits, which is the 17 colors of the UN's Sustainable Development Program. And, like you said, a year ago or a couple of years ago, if you'd mentioned Agenda 2030 or the Great Reset, you'd have been called a conspiracy theorist. Even a few months ago, if you'd have said, oh, people would try to introduce COVID vaccination travel passports, so you wouldn't be able to travel or access certain services without having some kind of pass or to show that you had a vaccination, they would have said that's a massive conspiracy theorist. Now we see government ministers actually advocating for this, in this country, but in countries in Europe and North America and other places in the world. So often yesterday's conspiracy theory has become today's reality. But beyond that, there are people, I think, who want to get rid of national sovereignty. I mean, that was the whole battle for Brexit that you mentioned, went on for 4.5 years after the referendum to try to overturn Brexit, because there are people, embedded in all the political parties in this country, the main political parties anyway, and all over the world, and in businesses and companies, and in Silicon Valley, which is the very, very powerful big tech, global corporations. They don't like national sovereignty. They want to get rid of nation states because I think it's easier for businesses then to make bigger profits and increase their power and increase their say over what happens in societies, without actually all these people with their ideas of being proud of their country and meeting each other and collecting in groups and communities. There's people who don't want that, who actually, I think, want to destroy that on a national level and a granular level. It's not everybody, but there are people who think in that way. So and they have a lot of power connected into the World Economic Forum and these global organizations where they all meet and then increase their influence together. So that is a very, very big danger. And unless people stand up and say we're not going to have it, they're going to just walk all over us and implement their plans.
We're down to the last 2 minutes of the program. So, Tim, as Christians, what should our response be to the lockdown and the need to defend Christian liberties?
Well, I'd say, listen, if you're living in England and Wales, open up your church, right? Make the church available, advertise it. I know a lot of churches are doing this, but too few actually are opening. And I think that's a real shame. So the first thing to do is open up your church, persuade your church leaders to get those doors open and meet and worship as you can, right? And then, provide food banks. Many churches are doing this as well, and social action, which you're allowed to do. And delivering things to people, which you're allowed to do and stuff, and go for walks with people, which you're allowed to do. Let's make the most of what we can do, even in this limited time. And let's also, start to challenge these issues, start to challenge this and campaign for schools to be open, universities to be open, businesses to be open. These things need to happen, and they need to happen as soon as possible.
And David, being on the front line of British politics and being in the London Assembly, what message do you have for our viewers watching about the need to defend our Christian values and liberties in this time when they're being threatened?
Yeah, well, I would agree with everything Tim just said about the church, and we also need to pray as Christians that the country would come to a place of repentance, to get back with God, and that everything will be set right. But in terms of politics, I would say three things. Firstly, activism. We need to get out on the streets and say that we're not having it. Secondly, we need to use the law. There are judicial reviews going through or challenging many of the statutory instruments and the laws that the government have made, which in my view are actually repugnant laws, which take away our fundamental freedoms. Thirdly, for the long term, we need a new political party, which is why I've set up, my own heritage party. And there's other people who are doing similar things. And, I think we need to challenge the political hegemony that we've got in the country, so that we never get these people, these people don't stay in power and continue to implement these laws that take away our civil liberties.
Tim and David, I thank you so much for being my guests on this edition of Politics Today. Please keep up the vital work that you are both doing in defending Christian liberties in this country. And to our viewers watching this program, it's important that we hold our government to account. Yes, we are dealing with a deadly virus, and it's affecting all of us, but we also need to ensure that our government doesn't take away our Christian freedoms and liberties, and these are preserved at all costs, especially in Scotland. So thank you for watching this home edition of Politics Today.